Well, it's no secret, Alan Parsons is back, and I am so sorry for that joke. Let's dive into this.
Show me a miracle. I wanna believe.
The Secret by Alan Parsons. So, Alan Parsons really doesn't need an introduction. Not only a very prolific producer within the 70s, producing a lot of very popular albums, but also being a producer of great music as the Alan Parsons Project. Now, the Alan Parsons Project technically kind of ended in the 80s, like 1987, I want to say. And then he came on the scene in the 90s with the Alan Parsons Band, putting out, I want to say, like 4 albums under that name. So here we come into the latest album of Alan Parsons, and it's kind of exactly what I had expected from Alan Parsons. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not a big fan of Alan Parsons. The only album that I really like from him is The Tales and Mystery of Imagination, the Edgar Allan Poe album, and that was the first one. And I, Robot was all right. It was really the only last 2 tracks off of that album that I really liked. The rest is just kind of poppy, accessible, middle of the road, not too hard, not too soft, trying to be everything for everybody pop music. And this is the type of music that I feel very isolating. I just don't really find anything out of it, especially like the content that they sing about. But I decided to try my hand at The Secret, the latest album from Alan Parsons. It seems to be making its rounds around the prog scene. And I have to admit, I am pretty impressed for what I hear. It is kind of a throwback to that style that he was capturing from the late 70s, early 80s. It is definitely that poppy, accessible, middle of the road, not too hard, not too soft. The songs on here are fine. Like, I never find myself completely checked out. I don't find myself completely annoyed or insulted by any of these tracks. But also, a lot of these tracks I don't feel all that connected with. And I have to be in a very specific mood in order to really get into these tracks. The first track is definitely the outlier and probably my favorite track, which is The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And that kind of perked me up because The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the classical work, is one of my favorite tracks and songs of all time. But it does do one of that condensing, because it does take a song that generally is 10, 12, 15 minutes, depending on the iteration that you want to present, and it really constricts it down to about a 5-minute track, and that's fine. When you're kind of cutting back and you're cutting straight to the bones, you are definitely going to lose something, and there was a little bit of magic that was lost within this track, but one of the guest stars being Steve Hackett brought a lot of that magic back. So it's more of an interpretation of the piece as opposed to just kind of a bargain bin track. So the overall concept of this album, the overall theme that we have on here is of magic, and that is magic in terms of like the magician, which we saw on the Sorcerer Apprentice. We also see that kind of running through in terms of like songs such as The Miracle, sometimes Fly to Me, Years of Glory, and The Limelight Fades Away, because the idea of magic does kind of come into that. I mean, half the time it is like the magic of love. But there's also like this bait and switch, this illusion, this look over here as the real task is being performed over here. And this is definitely found on, say, like the One Note Symphony, which is a kind of a magic trick in itself, in that the track is one note being sung. And this could have been boring really, really quickly, in that it's almost like 4 or 5 minutes long. And if the entire song was just, this is the One Note Symphony, we are always talking like this with the one note. The main driving force is the single note, but it's how the note interacts with all the notes that surround it and harmonizes with that. But then we also have like a lot of those melodramatic tracks of, that poppy singer-songwriter talking about love, and that's definitely found on Glory Years, Requiem, Fly to Me, Can't Get There From Here, As the Light Falls, The Miracle. I mean, practically every other song really at the end of the day is kind of along those lines, and I don't really all feel that excited about that. I can't connect with that concept, and I mean, that's just what I bring to the table. But it also doesn't really like celebrate it in any way. As Lights Fall and Fly to Me are the 2 songs that I would say I like a little bit more. They bring about a little bit more pep in their step. It's a little bit more catchy. I find myself kind of like singing along to these tracks as well. But really, that's all that they have going for them. The rest of the tracks on here are definitely that kind of, yeah. The only other one that really kind of perks me up is Requiem, because it does feel like a bluesy jazz bar or of like a noir film. But even that kind of a presentation, I feel like has been captured better in other ways. I mean, I will say, the worst that this album gets is Forgettable, and the best that it gets is just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. It's never too dull, and it's never too obnoxious, and I have to be, as I said, in a very specific mood for this album, and this is where I'm kind of fluctuating. Like, ultimately this album is forgettable for me, but I can at least appreciate what's being done on this album, and I will at least admit that the songs that are being presented here and the song styles that are being presented here are at least being presented in a way that I can enjoy, and it isn't grating on me, because other artists have attempted songs like this and have just fallen flat on their face. So at least this one's not a flat on their face, but it is more of like a, okay, cool, I'm gonna move on from here. That's about it. I mean, it's not really made for me. This is probably made for those who like these kinds of singer-songwriter poppy approach, conglomeration album from the 70s and 80s. This is probably made for them, but not necessarily made for me. So yeah, that's about it. That's about it for The Secret from the Alan Parsons. I almost said the Alan Parsons Project, but Alan Parsons. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know of your own thoughts about this album by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.